Welcome to Unsheltered Conversations, a podcast from HomeAid America, where we explore the stories behind housing, hope, and humanity. I'm your host, Scott Larson. In this episode, we focus on a story that captures this year's Homelessness Awareness Month theme, Someone You Know. Because sometimes the person who understands homelessness best isn't someone far away. It's someone who's lived through it. My guest today is Amber Celmer, the executive director of HomeAid Sacramento. Amber grew up in the foster care system, experienced instability firsthand, and today leads one of HomeAid's most active affiliates, building housing and creating pathways to stability for people experiencing homelessness in California's capital region. Her personal story is one of resilience and renewal, and it's also a powerful reminder that the line between security and struggle can be thinner than most people realize. We'll talk about her early life and how those experiences changed her calling, her leadership at HomeAid Sacramento, and a remarkable new project called The Grove, a community of renovated cabins offering transitional housing for youth, young adults experiencing foster care. Amber's story and her work are testaments to the truth that compassion and the construction can change lives. Amber, thank you for joining me today and being willing to share your story.
Thank you so much, Scott. I so appreciate the opportunity, and this is such an important segment to have. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, and Amber, before we dive into the questions, I'd be remiss to not offer you congratulations on your recent marriage. I met your fiance a few months ago and could not be more excited, and I'm sure you're still glowing and will continue to glow for months and years to come, but congratulations.
Thank you so much for that.
So Amber, I've heard you share your story of how your childhood in the foster care system and how you had periods of instability. What was that experience like for you growing up, with that instability and in the foster care system?
So, it's tough to explain so many years that in and out of foster care. As a child, as a young child, it was scary. It was tumultuous. It was confusing. That kind of evolved into, as a teenager, more shame and embarrassment once I realized why I was there or how different I was from everyone else. This cave of fear that I was in just turned into more awareness, and again trying to hide that. And it was really quite lonely. I remember at times, and it certainly was a chaotic situation that led to my removal from my mother's house. But at the Sacramento Children's Receiving Home, for example, the loneliness as a young child, having been ripped from my mother's care and also worried about her because of what led to me being ripped from her care, there was just this sadness that is really hard to explain. And at that time, the Sacramento Children's Receiving Home had and forgive me if I go off on tangents, but that the Sacramento Children's Receiving Home had phone booths that children would go into, and you had a limited time. And I remember quite vividly this feeling of physical heartache. I mean, my body hurt from it, but having been removed from my mother and worried about her safety and sitting on the phone with her, and toward the end of the time that was allotted, I can't remember how much time, but you would receive beeping and someone would tell you the minutes that you have left. And I just remember sitting on that phone, even quietly at the end, just waiting for the time to run out before they came and removed the cord so that the next person could go in. And I only say that to express the only way that I really know how to tell that feeling of just loneliness, sadness, and desperation. And then again, into the teenage years was just much different. I cared less about that and more about, oh my gosh, what do my peers think? Why am I so different?
Yeah, two very different experiences as a child and then as a teenager. And I'm grateful that the Sacramento Children's Receiving Home was there. Hopefully every community in the country has a place like that, but it is not a place that is without heartache and without challenges for the children that are taken there and then placed in foster care.
Absolutely.
You mentioned a little bit ago carrying shame and about being a foster child and how that made you different or how it made you feel that you were different. How did that affect your identity and your view ultimately then of housing or even what home looks like?
So, the shame and embarrassment came from being so different. And I think just from an early age, even as a child, I had this feeling of being a burden. And, I hate to compare myself to other foster children because all of our stories are individual from the next. But when you come into a stranger's house or even a family member's house, because I lived with family members at times, that's not your house, or you don't feel like you're that, whether or not they make you feel that way. And so for me, the shame of being different or being in another person's house when they actually have, maybe they have children of their own or they have families of their own. There's this foster child who's staying with us, or one of the times I was removed, and probably why I feel this sense of being a burden. One example, as a much younger child, and it was after being taken to the Sacramento Children's Receiving Home one of the several times, they were at capacity. And so after my intake, they took myself and my little brother, thank goodness, together to a foster home late at night. It must have been 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I'll never forget, and I don't think it was intentional, but this foster mother who was at the door to receive me, it's in the middle of the night. She's tired. Her face looks like I was a big burden,
Mm.
right? And again, I think it's just normal for, so going in there, and maybe the way that we were treated in the night once the police officer and the social worker left, you go in there knowing in that moment you're not ideal, you're not wanted. And that's a strong word because in no disrespect to this foster mother. So that sense of being a burden was something that I carried with me, and that evolved into shame. And so as I was around my peers and in school, that being a foster child was always something that I tried to hide. If I had to explain this much older couple that I was with, and my friends saw them, and who are those people, as they asked questions, I found myself kind of developing into a bit of a liar, like, oh, they're family friends, or covering it up. Just, I don't want to be different. For me, in fact, it worked in my favor because fortunately I was around a great crowd. And so to just fly under the radar, I did what they did. I filled out my FAFSA. When we were talking about colleges, me too. I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to apply here and I'm going to do this. And so I just became adaptable and built my own coping mechanisms, and because I had love in my home, fortunately, and I don't think that's the case for a lot of foster kids, but I did, for that reason, I was fairly resilient. And yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Although you were provided shelter, and that's a lot of key things that HomeAid has done, and it was a roof over your head, it really wasn't home. It was just a different that created that sense of either shame or instability. But what gave you strength? I mean, as that teenager, what gave you strength or hope when there was
Mhm.
such instability and things felt so removed? Was there something that you look back on that gave you hope?
Absolutely. Again, I had love in my family. My story is quite unique, and the dangers that put me in foster care. I had hope that one day I would be with my family. That hope dwindled later on in my older teenage years. But I know what gave me hope is that I recognized, and I don't mean this, Scott, in a self-promoting way, but I did recognize that I was different. I recognized that I was capable for some reason. And this is a silly example, but I remember one time playing basketball in, I think it was seventh grade or eighth grade. And I so badly didn't want to stand out. My life was so in and out of schools and sports. And as we're doing, I just told myself, you can do this. And I grabbed the basketball. And I just remember this moment of, I can really fake it till I make it. I can do what they're
Yes.
doing. And I just remembered that. And I told myself that anything I tried, I would be good at because I don't want to stick out. And I'm just going to, that's how I'm going to live my life. And so during that process, and I realized that the many foster siblings that I had during my multiple stays and shuffled between so many different foster homes, I was different. My story was different. I noticed this, to me, loud sense of maybe a different access that I had, maybe because I looked different, or so many others I felt like were in a situation that wasn't going to be in their favor at some point. And so I felt this ability where maybe I can do something, maybe I can make change. And so early on, I was 12, 13. through a mentor that I kind of sought out, I joined a youth advocacy organization. And while I was very shameful amongst my peers about talking to my story, I realized that if I tell one of my social workers actually asked if I would participate in foster parent training. So that was kind of the kickstart. I participated in foster parent training, told foster parents what would benefit someone in my traumatized state. And that made me realize, and that access and exposure, people came to me with different opportunities. And so this youth advocacy organization that I joined, whereby I would participate in workshops to let some of the adult leaders know the issues within the foster care system that are gaps for us and lead to so many children falling through the cracks. We explored these, and I actually learned how to become part of creating a bill. And so there was about 4 or 5 bills that I participated in writing and getting authored. The funny thing is, talk about circling back, and I know we'll get back to this. That's how I met Daryl Steinberg. It was the
Yes.
late 90s when he was in the assembly. He ended up authoring 3 of those bills, and they had a lot to do with, believe it or not. I know there's still a lot of opportunity for improvement in the foster care system now, but then it was hard, Scott. Siblings issues bill, just permanency in group homes. And I'd never been in a group home, but I had foster siblings who were in group homes, and I understood the lack of permanency. I understood that how important it was at times because I didn't understand my rights. And so one of them was the Bill of Rights, ensuring that every foster care facility, whether it be a residential facility or anyone who houses a foster child, that they have posted the Bill of Rights, and so that those children feel empowered and they know what they can do. Anyhow, that kept, even though I knew I wouldn't benefit directly as a child, I knew that I could change the system. And that to me gave me a little bit of a sense of home, just because I had surrounded myself with those individuals who made me feel appreciated, or maybe this experience I had wouldn't, be in vain.
Well, several things pop out to me with what you were just talking about, Amber, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge it. One, you're already showing signs of leadership,
Oh.
the ability to step in and provide guidance to other foster parents and what could be done to be better, even if it wasn't necessarily for yourself. And then the fact that it led to several bills and you're meeting with Daryl Steinberg. The other thing that, and I'm just chuckling at this, for those that don't know you or have not met you in person, you're not of great stature. And I can only imagine the tenacity that you had on the basketball court, the fierceness, because your height was not an advantage. But I don't think that anybody could take you on in a one-on-one thing on a basketball court.
That's putting it so kindly, Scott.
So kudos to you for using basketball to your advantage in your tenacity and your spirit. So
Oh,
I I think that is just absolutely fantastic.
thank you, Scott.
So as you started your professional career, it was in the building industry. You got into new home sales. You
Mhm.
then moved into strategy at tech firms and then moved into the housing nonprofit space. What made you pivot towards the work of HomeAid Sacramento?
So joining the building industry in the beginning, what that must have been 2005. I remember it was actually the recruiter, Syntex Homes. She lives in my neighborhood now. That's a funny first interaction. But I was drawn to the building industry because I just remembered just this vision of these master plan communities and families that had access to homes. And I thought, well, I could work to getting myself to having access to that home. Just for some reason, it was so attractive to me because the marketing always shared this picture of building memories and home. And so that's what was initially attracted to me. And then, of course, once I entered into the building industry, as you know, I'm quite part from personal experience. So this is an amazing industry. I became fascinated with every facet, from land acquisition to the design room to, every part of it was so fascinating. I mean, what other industry has a forward planning department that, plans out 100 years? It just became so fascinating to me. And that empowered me. Also, the idea that someone can, with minimal to no education, really build themselves up in an industry. So
Yes.
I digress. And so I moved on to into another industry. And eventually when I had my first child, Harper, 10 years ago, oh my gosh, can't believe I had this strong feeling that, I had a little bit of mom guilt, as we have every so often, about spending more than half my life, in the workplace and away from my child. And I thought, I'm going to continue to work because I'm a capable person and I needed to work. But I want my child to know that I'm doing something important. I want to, if I'm going to work anyway, it makes most sense to do something that makes an impact. And so I moved into the nonprofit world at first with Child Advocates of Placer County. They actually house the Youth to Youth Mentorship Organization that I founded way back when, but run the local court appointed special advocates program.
The CASA
And
program. Yes.
so that helped develop my nonprofit experience, and which is, of course, quite different from the building industry. And toward the end of my tenure there, it was COVID. And I have these twins all of the sudden. That was a big surprise. I'm expecting one. I have two. And I think, the education system, all these fears of COVID, this is my calling. I need to stay home with them to help them navigate this, to help me navigate this. And then I had a friend from Child Advocates slap this announcement in front of me and they said, I know you want to stay home with the babies, Amber, but I feel like you have an obligation to just read this. And it was as if it pulled in my personal life, my life in the building industry. And I felt also, I have to do this. I'll throw my name in the hat, but there's no way, because I think they received 100 applications or anyhow, all goes to, so at the end of it, we all know the story and what happened, but that's what led all of these different parts of my life. Really, I feel like my life was paved to do this work and be with HomeAid. That's what led me to the nonprofit sector.
Yours and my stories parallel in some aspects with that piece because I had construction experience. I loved the home building industry and walked construction sites, did construction ROP. My then career took me into more education nonprofit. And then it was a perfect blend when I came to HomeAid. And yours is as well.
Oh, wow.
Our childhood experiences, our professional experiences has led you and myself to be successful in this work at HomeAid. Yeah, I've heard you say this phrase, I'm not here to be shy. I'm here to pack a punch. What does that mean in the context of HomeAid Sacramento and your work?
So for me, I lived my life quite shy. I've been told recently walking on eggshells, right? As I explore these experiences in my life with a professional. And I recognize that I did tread lightly. I tiptoed because I didn't want to be seen or heard or a burden, right? My great aunt, my grandmother's sister, I lived with her for several months, nearly a year at one point, and I remember her making this statement. She was telling a family member and kind of teasing me in a sweet way. I'm pretty sure she must go in that bathroom and after her showers completely clean the bathroom. And I love having her here. And I thought to myself, I was like, you know what? Well, I do. I had this desire at it, and I must have been 7 or 8. Don't want to be a burden. You didn't expect me here. And because of, the adults in my life let me down and now I'm here and thank you. So, how can I say thank you? How can I not be seen or heard or impede on your privacy? And I do remember washing her tub after I would shower there. And so my whole point is I was this intense shyness that I'd adopted as an early age. As soon as I became empowered and knew I was capable and I wanted to do this, and once I got out of that shame and embarrassment, and quite frankly, the reason what helped me get away from that shame and embarrassment in my adult life and tell my story is having kids. I realized how it to me, I mean, it brought me to tears imagining my children feeling shame for a situation an adult put them in. And so I was just done being shy. I knew I could pack a punch. And like you said, my husband and his closest friends call me TBM, tiny but mighty. I don't feel small. I've shrunken myself for so long. I've been shrunken by several, people in my life. And as small as my stature might be, I don't feel any smaller or any less capable than anyone. And that's what I'm here to do. I truly, Scott, have nothing to lose in this role. And
Yep.
so why not pack that punch? Yeah, I'm just done being shy.
Well, you fill a room. Your presence absolutely does. So let's shift to talking about the Grove and the Adopt a
Yes.
Cabin program. It was a privilege to be there at the dedication a number of months ago. And this is a program for youth uh, exiting foster care. For our listeners who do not know, that's ages 18 to 24. Why was this population a focus for HomeAid Sacramento?
So when you think of the opportunity, and as an organization, Scott, you and I feel quite similarly about the continuum of care and this, we different ages and different demographics, we all have this different, there's a different impact that can be made. And first, specifically for the Grove, this transition age, while they are either emancipated or they aged out of the foster care, them choosing, right, because it's by choice that they're at the Grove, them choosing to be there gives us one last opportunity to grab them, give them services, wrap them in services. And I did tell it, and it was so nice to have you there, by the way, at the ribbon cutting ceremony. Thank you for that. But the story I mentioned there, a gentleman who experienced foster care and had some behavioral issues due to the trauma that he'd experienced. He explained it. There was this analogy of a jar with marbles, and the marbles represented age, right? And so as a foster child ages, marble, there's much less room before you put the cap on it. And so for these ages of when typically we're done at 18, they're thrown out, they have no one to turn back to. We have this opportunity from 18 to 24 to give them vocational skills, be there to for them to fall back on. If they want to know how to boil water, education, employment skills, opportunities, therapies, different things to help create a pathway into adulthood for them that is healthy and really keeping them out of the adult system of care, right? This is our last chance to remove or, stop a cycle for them. And so that's why it was important. I feel like that age group is such a major impact we can make in moving the needle as we address this daunting issue of homelessness.
Yep, I definitely agree because it's a critical age that ties into prevention. I mean, their life experience so far may have had them experiencing homelessness, although they may have been wards of the state, et cetera. But this, you're right, is one of those last opportunities. So, how many cabins are there,
Oh
and
my goodness.
what's the eligibility criteria for someone to get into the Grove?
So it started with 24 and then ended up now today it's 50 cabins. Much like anyone else would seek out shelter, they typically it's either by referral or they'll dial 211. When I say low barrier, they don't have to be clean and sober necessarily. They can't have anything on the premises, but they do have to be actively engaged in the services that are offered there. It's not an option. So to reside there, you have to be engaged. They say that the average young person who resides there or who is a guest there, they are removed 2 or 3 times because behavior is another thing. You
Yep.
have to behave properly, you have to follow the rules, which, that it's curfew, it's behavior, it's contact with others. You have to be either employed or seeking employment or some type of vocational skill. You have to be engaged in some type of therapy to address traumas. And so they have expectations there that, well beyond just a roof over their heads, right? They have the services that are going to help well beyond just providing shelter from the elements.
Yeah, so maybe the initial threshold might be low, but there are requirements, and that's helping to get them ready for the next step in their life.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about what the building industry did. The partnership bringing in labor and materials and in-kind donations that made a difference at the Grove. Tell us, and we'll have some photos in the show notes, et cetera, but tell us, what did the building industry do to renovate these cabins?
Oh my gosh. Well, if you can imagine rallying, so to renovate 50 cabins, if you can imagine rallying 32 builders and trade partners, that's amazing.
That's
Who
a
were
lot.
all, I mean, that's what we do anyhow, but this was this was like a big party of what Homemade does, separately for different projects. And what they did was well beyond this initial crazy thought I had to renovate. They realized that before we even start on renovating the cabins, these young adults would walk through slush to get to and from work or anywhere. They decided, well, they need to feel like this is a community and they need to have some dignity even in their outdoor space. And so we did a lot of flat work there. The slush, the mud that would be created in the winter months is now completely paved with outdoor landscaping. We had outside of the 32 cabin adopters, we had other trades raise their hand and say, please, can I just provide you with all of my landscaping services for whatever you need, for wherever you need it on the site? They fell in love with it so much. And then as far as the inside of the cabins, we had some restrictions, of course, right? They needed to have, we could not obscure the aerial view for safety. So we had some big dreams that we weren't able to fulfill, but we did provide, drainage and some other fixes to some issues they had during the winter months. We provided them with a small shade structures, overhangs, outdoor landscaping. For the most part, while we did do the exterior and provide seating for them, so they didn't just initially they had this. It must have been a 2 by 3 concrete slab into the slush. Well, that was now expanded with chairs, so they could get out and instead of just getting out and running to the next space, they can have a seat and enjoy with their neighbor like anyone else would. On the inside, one of the instructions that I felt was important to our builders was, hey, I know we want to give the kids the world. This is what we do. However, we want them to be comfortable, but not so comfortable that they don't want to leave.
If they don't want
So
to
there
leave.
was no electronics, no, we also had safety things that we had to adhere to. And the greatest part about it is because we did involve the young adults in the process. We wanted to do what they needed, not what we thought they needed. And most of them, none of them actually mentioned TVs or anything like that. Their wants and desires and needs were so modest. It truly was. I mean, it was an outlet so that I could plug in my phone and listen to music at the same time, or my reading lamp, or a suitable desk to do my homework, or maybe a cubby to hide my undergarments
Yeah.
because right now I have a tub. We had a couple built in requirements, and that was to standardize the beds. Previously, they had been sleeping on 2-inch foam pads on a raised structure. And so we ripped all of that out. And so they have actual beds with real mattresses.
Nice.
And they did painting. They provided storage, armoires. We provided a general list like a builder would. They could pick and choose some options. But the builders and the trade partners came in and went way beyond expectation. I mean, we had a builder, they ripped out what was there with plywood that was there for a desk before, and they put in a custom, beautiful, made out of a tree from one of their backyards, beautiful custom desk, and just made it feel so homey. Everyone did focus on those healing colors and definitely focused on keeping everything neutral and calm. It was fantastic. It was truly a tough shed before and now something probably more dignified than some of us regular folks live in.
Well, what this just underscores is what the building industry does through HomeAid at its best. It's bringing their skills and expertise to something that may not have been really a conducive environment and created a place of dignity and empowerment, because you and I have talked about this before. We truly believe that the built environment is part of the healing process. And our industry does that at its absolute best. And having met some of the young adults when I was there for the dedication, the ribbon cutting, you could see how just, like you were talking about, the concrete walkways, the little patios, their own individual spaces, which they were so proud to share. That dignity and that respect for the person, it has untold impact. And we feel it a little bit, but to see it and to experience it with these young adults is absolutely amazing. So thank you for what you were doing there. And I'm so glad that, again, that I got a chance to see it.
Yes. No, thank you. And one last thing I just have to say that comes to mind as you say that. I'm so I've been back there at least a dozen times since the project. And one reason was there's a magazine that did a story on it, and the young adult who allowed us to tour their cabin. And this was similar to some of the other young adults that I've visited since. It is the most beautiful thing to know that this project was so meaningful and so beautiful, and that they felt someone cared for them. They leave they try to keep everything in the spot that they say your people is what they tell me that your people created, but that you could tell that they have while they're required to keep their rooms clean, they you could tell that each of them take a lot of pride in keeping it exactly the way the designer or the cabin adopter made it, right? And because we do have youth who graduate from the rapid rehousing program and they move on or they're leaving for another reason, they kind of carry that same sentiment to the next people moving in. And what I've heard from the service providers there, from the staff, is that this project has completely transformed the tone there.
Yep.
These were young adults who were a bit angry. They shuffled from one place to the next, did not treat the staff well, and now there's just this sense of appreciation and working together, and it doesn't stop with them. That is how they explain it to the people coming in, and so it has been sustainable, and that's
Yep.
important to us.
And again, and we've said this time and time again in the homemade world, but we never know where someone has come from or where they're going to go. But when they're there, it should be a place of dignity and respect because it does up their own self-respect because somebody did that for them. So very, very true. I do want to, before we kind of begin to look at a couple wrapping up things, but these young adults we talked about a little bit ago are at such a risk of homelessness because of their upbringing and the systems. And what do you see as the most critical gap facing these young adults today to prevent them experiencing homelessness?
I mean, I would say, um, the obvious. I mean, we could talk about the lack of transportation, the lack of a consistent adult in their life. I would say even the lack of resources. So again, you age out at 18 and you have no one to fall back on. But let's say you even have a glimmer of hope, perhaps you don't have someone to help get you to that next place. You don't have the same type of emotional and mental support even as you seek out these employment opportunities. So that's a major gap. Another gap would quite truly just be access to housing is so limited. And so at that age when, their frontal lobes are still developing and there are so many other factors to consider, I mean, how does one bring themselves up out of an already challenging experience to land housing when there's such a shortage
Yeah.
of, you know.
Yeah. It all circles back to housing.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to one of our other affiliates, a builder or a community that wants to replicate what was done at the Grove?
Gosh, I would say involve the youth, involve the young adults. Um, I I think I know the obvious, ensuring that full services are involved. Several years ago, when I first started, it's been a little over 4 years, I attended an event. I don't know if it was one of Mayor Steinberg's addresses. I forget what the event was, but there was a period of time where he opened it up for public commentary. And I'll never forget how blaring the sense that, NIMBYism was the tone of that call, as it is on a lot of those calls. But it occurred to me, wow, most people really do view homelessness as they think it looks just like a hypodermic needle, right? And that's it. And I use this analogy a lot, but I realized after that point that, it doesn't look like a hypodermic needle. We have to consider everyone who's involved and the many lives who are touched by homelessness that again might be hidden by shame. But I would tell people to educate themselves. Most importantly, again, if they plan to partner with a service provider, shelter without services is like a band-aid over a gaping head wound.
Could
It's
not agree
going to
more.
compound. And so just make sure that dignity is a part of that process. And part of that dignity is ensuring that the young adults are involved in that process, but also, hey, go as far as providing a bit of mentorship, a smile, or some sense of connectivity with them to make sure that because that's your opportunity to engage with a young adult who maybe every adult in their life let them down. Give them a smile, give them something beyond just the renovation that they could carry on and provide them with a little bit of hope
Yeah,
and
that
treat them, give them the same expectations that perhaps you would give your own children, right? Maybe If you have some words of wisdom or advice, go beyond graduate high schools. Hey, if you want to become a dog, I think we try to pigeonhole current and former foster youth and, just doing the bare minimum. But what truly is going to help advance them is having faith enough and the same expectations you would of anyone else in your life.
Absolutely. And, I'd asked earlier what gave you hope as that teenager in the foster care system. Now that you're a housing leader, clearly making impact with HomeAid Sacramento, you're a mom, newly remarried. What gives you hope now for the work that you're doing and the youth that you serve, and just even our sector as a whole?
What gives me hope is I am recognizing that, on the heels of HomeAid, for example, but also a lot of other nonprofits and groups, we're addressing issues around homelessness much, much differently, right? We're looking at the long term, we're being more strategic, and that gives me hope. Also, these young adults and the involvement of some of the end users, right, of these services, their involvement gives me hope because there's such a strong desire for those populations to be involved. And my goodness, they're sharp and their experiences are worthwhile. And so the more I see that in my communities, that gives me tremendous hope. I would say so many things give me hope. I just think we have done a decent job of educating people to understand, and we all feel a little bit more connected to homelessness. None of us can completely avoid it's closer to us than we think, right? No matter where we are in our socioeconomic status, natural disaster can happen at any time. A COVID can happen at any time, right? A pandemic can happen at any time. We're all closer to homelessness than we think, or we know someone close to that. I see there's a bit more education around it and understanding.
So just to double down on that, this is Homelessness Awareness Month, and our theme is someone you know. What would you leave with our listeners about that message and that it might be closer than they think?
Oh gosh. So, well, I just mentioned, homelessness doesn't look like a hypodermic needle as we like to believe. However, it could get there if we don't provide prevention. Homelessness looks like me, Scott. I mean, homelessness looks like children who are sitting in this desk right next to your child. And for reasons, whether it be shame or systems in place that help hide that and protect their confidentiality, we don't know. I have my husband and I hired someone to help us with something really important recently. And I realized one day as I was driving and I went in and typed in this person's address to see how long it would take to walk there. I thought I saw this person and I stopped. I called my husband and, we came up with a quick game plan. I didn't want to embarrass this person, but I called this person. I said, "Hey, can you just be real with me? Are you walking to work?" And this person just started crying. I think this is what I'm saying here is some people find themselves in such desperate situations that they don't even realize it's a desperate situation. We just roll up our sleeves to work and get out of this rut. But there is suffering all around us, and there are people steps away from homelessness, or their children are steps away and we just, because we don't ask those questions, or because there's so much shame, or because we've become as a culture so accustomed to, we don't ask for help anymore because people shut us down so much, or people make us feel shameful if we ask for help. For those very reasons, you might have someone in your fancy office that is just days away from experiencing homelessness.
Yep, absolutely. Which is why every interaction with every human being needs to be done with compassion and kindness. So, Amber,
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your courage and your honesty today and your leadership. And all that reminds us that every project that HomeAid builds and every partnership that HomeAid forms starts with a story. It starts with your story. And we are often reminded and need to be reminded that it looks like people that we know. Through the Grove Project, HomeAid Sacramento and its partners have proven that safe housing can be more than just a structure, more than just a tough shed. And it's a bridge to belonging and purpose and a future full of promise. So if you'd like to learn more about the Grove, HomeAid Sacramento's work as a whole, or the HomeAid network nationwide, go ahead and visit our website in the show notes and find this episode and others like it. Amber, again, thank you for joining me today. I'm Scott Larson, and this has been Unsheltered Conversations. Thanks for listening, and thank you for helping build a future where everyone has a place to call home.